The sept of Baelor echoed with the murmurs of a restless crowd, the sun beating down on King's Landing like an omen. Lord Eddard Stark knelt, the sword ice just a breath away from his neck. But something shifted in that moment, not in the hearts of men, but in the shadows that moved behind them. Varys had warned Ned the night before. You must think of your daughters. Confess treason, bend the knee, and you might yet survive. But even if you do not, I have a way. That way had involved a mixture of alchemy, deception, and risk. Pyromancers loyal to the Master of Whisperers had created a rare elixir one that could slow the heart, mimic death. The executioner, Sir Elin Payne, had been paid in secrets. And when the sword came down, what cleaved was not life, but the illusion of it. The crowd screamed. Sansa collapsed. Arya, hidden in the throng by Yoren, was already being ushered away. A man resembling Ned's corpse was shown to the world, bloodied and broken, head severed clean. But down below, in the crypts of the Red Keep, the real Eddard Stark awoke in cold darkness, gasping for breath, clutching his neck and trying to make sense of his second chance. He did not stay long. Disguised as a mute servant, he was smuggled out of the capital by Varys' agents in the dead of night. Word of Ned Stark's death had spread like wildfire, and no one thought to look twice at a hunched man scrubbing floors or driving a mule cart. The real trick had been keeping it quiet from even the Lannisters. Only Varys and a handful of loyal men knew the truth, and Varys, ever the spider, had spun his webs so well no one could untangle them. Ned made his way south first, not north. North was too dangerous, too obvious. Instead, he was guided through the Stormlands, passed among peasants and outlaws who owed favors to the realm's quieter forces. The war had begun. Robb had declared himself king in the north, and Ned, watching from the shadows, was filled with grief and pride alike. He wanted nothing more than to ride to his son, embrace him, tell him the truth. But that could undo everything. He took refuge in an abandoned sept in the hills beyond Blackhaven, disguised as a wandering healer. His skills as a lord had not included medicine, but he picked up enough from Maester Luwine and old battlefield wounds to pass. With a gray beard, shaven head, and silent vow, no one saw the honorable lord in the man they called Jean of the Hills. He found peace, strange as it was, in treating the sick and mending bones. Children ran past him without fear. He spent his days in quiet prayer, not to the Seven, but to old gods of the north. Their faces weren't carved in the trees here, but he felt them watching still. But the world didn't stop turning. News came even to his refuge. Robb's victories, Renly's death, Stannis' war, Winterfell's fall. Bran and Rickon believed. Dead. Ned knelt in solitude the day he heard it, clutching a small wooden carving of a direwolf, carved from memory. He had traded the sword for silence, his name for safety, and it weighed on him every day. Still, he endured. He had to, for his daughters, for his broken house. He told himself that by living, he would one day help them, perhaps not with sword or army, but with wisdom. Perhaps even with truth. It was during the 3rd year of war, when winter's breath reached even the southern hills, that a boy came to the sept bleeding from a stab wound. He was no older than 14. Ned treated him, cared for him, and the boy, half delirious, spoke of a raven one that came in dreams. With 3 eyes, Ned froze. That night, he prayed not in silence, but aloud for the first time in years. The old gods did not answer with words, but the wind carried a scent he had not smelled since Winterfell. Pine, cold, and snow. And with it came a decision. It was time to go north, that the wind howled across the King's Road like a warning, slicing through Ned's worn cloak and biting his skin with every step northward. He had not walked this road since the days of Robert's rebellion, and even then he had never known it so empty. War had torn Westeros apart. Villages were abandoned, inns turned to ruins, fields scorched or salted by retreating armies. The small folk had either fled or buried themselves in the earth. Yet Ned pressed on, each step driven not by rage or vengeance, but by purpose. He avoided major roads, keeping to the shadows, guided by memory and whispers. Every night he dreamt of Winterfell, its halls, its godswood, the face of Catelyn fading like mist. He dreamt of Robb, young and fierce, wearing a crown of iron and snow. He dreamt of Bran and Rickon, their little voices echoing with laughter that cut deeper than any blade. And always Arya's face blurred, half forgotten, wild-eyed and out of reach. Crossing the neck was the first true danger. The phrase still held the twins, and if they discovered the truth of Ned Stark's survival, the price on his head would be too tempting. So he went east, through swamps and bogs where will-o'-the-wisps danced and frogs croaked like ghosts. A Crannogman, named Eric, possibly sent by Howland Reed himself, found him half-starved and delirious. He didn't ask questions, just fed him eel and lentils, and guided him on a flat-bottomed boat through the mists of the neck, saying little except, "You're not dead to the right people." When Ned finally crossed into the north, he dropped to his knees and kissed the frozen soil. The air was colder here, not just in temperature, but in soul. It was home. He traveled under the name John Rivers, a bastard's name from the south, unworthy of suspicion in his weathered form. He avoided towns, but the stories found him nonetheless. Robb Stark, the young wolf, had taken the west. Then he'd taken a bride. Then he'd marched south again. And then he'd died, Dot, crushed him like no sword ever could. Ned had endured torture, exile, the lie of his own death, but learning that his eldest son had been slaughtered at the twins during a wedding feast broke something in him. The boy he'd raised, who had fought not just for glory, but for justice, was now food for crows because of his honor. He cried that night, not for Robb alone, but for himself, for the lie that had brought them here. If he had died truly on the steps of the Sept, perhaps the North would have fought more fiercely. Or perhaps less. He would never know. He lingered for months in a fishing village near White Harbor, helping the sick, listening to ravens in the square. Then, on a rain-slick morning, he heard something that rekindled a fragile ember in him. R-Y-A. Rumors spoke of a girl with a sword, feral as a cat, traveling with outlaws and faceless killers. Some said she was dead. Others said she was in Braavos. And some whispered she had no name at all. Ned felt her ghost brushing past him in the wind. If she lived, there was hope. If she remembered who she was, maybe she would remember him. By the time snow began to fall thick, Ned knew where he had to go next. The Wall. He would not ride to Winterfell. That was no longer his. Bolton banners flew from its towers now, skinned men where direwolves once stood. But the Wall? The Night's Watch? There might still be something of honor left there. And Jon Snow his son, his blood, even if not by name, was still Lord Commander, if the whispers were true. He left quietly, bundled in furs, taking the long road to Castle Black. Every mile was heavier than the last. He remembered Benjen's laughter, the solemn oaths of brothers, the cold nights by the fire with men who no longer breathed. He also remembered the truth Jon must one day know. If Jon still lived, Ned would tell him everything. Snow thickened. Wolves howled in the forest beyond. Ned's bones ached, but his resolve did not falter. He was done hiding and far to the north, past the frost and the fire. Another war had already begun, one, not of kings, but of ice and death. Stark walked into it as a man reborn, not to fight for thrones, but for the living. The wall rose before him like a monolith of memory and judgment, stretching across the frozen horizon. Ned Stark stood at the edge of the world once more, cloaked in furs and shadow, staring up at the same towering sheet of ice that had once swallowed his brother. The wind here was crueler, as if the gods themselves demanded answers. And Ned had not only the truth he carried like a wound, hidden but unhealed. The guards at Castle Black did not recognize him. Why would they? The man at their gates was bent with age, bearded and hollow-eyed, more ghost than lord. He gave a false name and asked for shelter. They granted it, for food and work. The Night's Watch had no time for questions. The realm was bleeding. And at the wall, all men were equal, or so they claimed. Jon was not there. Ned learned from a steward that Jon Snow had been killed, stabbed by his own men, betrayed. The words hit him harder than Robb's death, because this one felt closer. Jon, who had been the last thread, the last tie to his true blood. Jon, who had chosen duty over family, just as Ned once had. The son who had always wanted his father's respect, now lay cold and betrayed by those he had led. But the steward spoke of strange things. A red woman, a wildling army. Ghost, the direwolf, howling for days without rest. And then life. They say he rose from the dead, the boy whispered to Ned while stacking firewood. They say he walked out of the chamber with blood still on his shirt. It couldn't be. Ned had seen death. He had felt its cold breath. Yet the old gods, and perhaps other gods, had grown restless in this world. If Jon lived, if even part of this madness was true, then Ned had to see it for himself. He didn't approach immediately. He watched from afar, like a shade lingering. Behind the veil, Jon had changed. His face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much too soon. The boy who had once looked up to Ned now looked through men. There was fury in his eyes, and sorrow. Ned knew he had to speak to him, but the moment never came. Not in the mess hall, not in the training yard, not in the flickering torchlight, where Jon stood among wildlings and crows alike. Too many eyes, too many risks, until one night the wind had died. Snow fell in silence. Jon stood alone in the godswood of Castle Black, such as it was, a ragged circle of trees hardened by wind. And time. He knelt before a blackened stump that might once have held a face. Ned stepped forward. Jon turned sharply, hand on the hilt of his sword. Who's there? Ned removed his hood. The firelight of a nearby torch caught his face. For a moment, neither moved. Jon, he said softly. His voice was hoarse, foreign even to himself. Jon's grip loosened. No, he whispered. This isn't possible. It shouldn't be, Ned replied. But here I am. Jon stared at him like a man confronting a ghost he wasn't sure he wanted to see. I saw you die, he said. I saw your head. It wasn't me. It was planned to protect your sisters. To protect you. Varys helped me escape. I've lived in silence since. Jon sat down heavily on a bench of snow-covered stone. Robb is dead. Mother too. They're all gone. I know, Ned said, sitting beside him. And that is my burden. I thought hiding would keep you safe. I thought staying dead would give you a better chance. But I was wrong. Jon looked at him, searching for anger, finding only confusion. Why now? Because you are not the same boy I left, and I am no longer the man I was. We both carry truths, and I think you deserve to hear yours. Jon was silent. Then softly he asked, What truth? Ned looked out over the wall, where the wind whispered secrets in a language older than men. You are not my bastard. Jon flinched. You are Lyanna's son. My sisters, your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. The silence afterward was eternal. Only the wind spoke, rattling against the wall, and as Jon Snow sat in the shadow of his own history, torn between blood and loyalty, Ned Stark knew that what came next would decide more than just one boy's fate, that it might decide the fate of the realm. Jon did not speak for a long time. He stared at the snow-covered ground beneath his feet as if it might open and swallow him whole. The world had changed already. He had died, come back, faced betrayal, and watched the dead march. But this shifted something deeper. This was not a sword to his chest. This was a sword to his identity. Why? He finally asked, voice low and rough. Why lie to me? Why make me wear a name that didn't belong? Ned's heart twisted at the familiar pain in Jon's voice. To protect you. If Robert had known who you truly were, you would have died before your first breath. He hated all Targaryens, even children, especially children. Jon shook his head. But you raised me as your bastard. It was the only way. I brought you home because I could not bear to leave you with strangers. But I had to lie, even to Catelyn. It cost me her trust. It cost me your peace. I know that now. Jon clenched his jaw. All these years, and you never said a word. I wanted to, so many times, but the danger never passed. And then I was arrested, imprisoned, sentenced. Even in my final days in that cell, I thought telling you might reach you in time. But I didn't know if I would live long enough. Then the plan to fake my death came, and everything changed. Jon stood, turning his back. You should have trusted me with the truth. I would have carried it. I know, Ned said softly. And I'm sorry, more than you know. The silence that followed wasn't cruel, only tired. Both men bore scars that could not be seen, and neither knew how to heal them. Eventually, Jon turned back. Does anyone else know? Only a few. Howland Reed was there, the day Lyanna died. He can confirm it. And Sam, your friend, he may have read it in the Citadel records by now. Your birth was not just hidden. It was sacred. Lyanna made me swear I would protect you, and I failed you in too many ways. But you're alive. That still matters. Jon nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. And now? What do we do with it? I don't want the throne, Ned. I never did. Ned stood, brushing frost from his knees. It's not about the throne anymore. It's about survival. The dead march from the north. The realm is fractured. Daenerys Targaryen is in Westeros now. She is your blood. You need to know where you come from before you decide where to stand. Jon's eyes flickered. She has. Dragons and fire. And you have winter, Ned said. You are of ice and fire both. They stood in silence, the wind circling them like an unseen third figure in their reunion. Then, slowly, Jon stepped forward and embraced Ned. It wasn't the embrace of a lord and subject. It was the embrace of a son and father, finally made whole again. Only for a moment. But time was no longer their ally. By morning, word had come from Eastwatch. The Night King had broken the wall. A dragon, undead and howling frost, had torn through the ancient barrier like parchment. The dead now marched south, and the living had little time left. Jon gathered his men, wildlings, black brothers, and even some southern volunteers who had come north to fight. He gave no speeches. He had no time. But he moved with new purpose. And those who saw him noticed something different. His step was heavier, but his eyes were clearer. Ned did not stand beside him in public. He remained in shadow, moving through the tunnels and courtyards of Castle Black as a ghost. Only a handful of trusted men knew who he was now. Davos Seaworth, Tormund Jensbane, Samwell Tarly. Each one swore to guard the secret, and each understood. the weight of what it meant. John confided in Sam that night. "If I die again," he said, "you tell them the truth, all of it. The North deserves to know." "And if you live?" Sam asked. "Then maybe we start writing a new truth." When the war horn blew from atop the wall, it was not a drill. The army of the dead had come. John rode out first, Ghost at his side, lone claw in hand, flanked by wildlings and crows alike. And behind the walls, in the keep that had stood for centuries, Ned Stark climbed the highest tower and watched. He would not fight with them. He was too old, too slow. But he would not hide again. Not now. And if the old gods were listening, he asked only one thing. Let his children live. Let them finish what he could not. The sky above Castle Black churned with ash and ice, as if the heavens themselves braced for war. Ned Stark stood at the top of the watchtower, his old fingers gripping the stone ledge, eyes scanning the white wasteland beyond. In the distance, a low roar echoed like thunder twisted by death. And then he saw it, an ancient terror returned, flying above the ranks of the dead. Viserion, the dragon of the east, reborn in shadow and ice, spewing frost instead of fire. Ned's breath caught in his throat. His mind returned to stories of old, of the long night, of winter without end. He had never believed in monsters, only in men. But now he knew better. Lo, him, John stood at the front lines, flanked by Tormund, Davos, and hundreds of wildlings and black brothers. A force united not by politics, but by survival. Ghost paced beside John like a silent shadow, fur bristling, eyes locked on the storm. Beyond, John's face was calm, but there was something in his posture more than defiance. A quiet acceptance. Ned knew that stance. He had worn it once himself before the Battle of the Trident. The first wave came with the wind-whites shrieking, skeletal horses galloping through drifts of snow. Men screamed, arrows flew. Fire arrows, obsidian spears, the clang of dragonglass. Against frozen flesh, chaos erupted. And still, John stood firm. From above, Ned saw it all. He couldn't fight anymore, but he could guide. He rang the signal bells, shifted torchlight patterns, sent runners to reinforce weak points. A commander's instincts, sharpened by years of war, returned as if they'd never left. And in the midst of the battle, Ned spotted him. The Night King strode through the snow like a god of winter, eyes glowing blue, arms spread wide. Every fallen man rose again behind him, jerking back to life with eyes like his own. John saw him too. The two locked eyes through this field of death. John charged. He fought his way through the swarm with fury and grace, Loneclaw flashing with each strike. Every movement brought him closer. Ghost tore through whites at his side, a white blur in the storm. It was as if all of House Stark had gathered into one moment, into one charge. Ned watched from above, silent, still. He could do nothing more than witness what came next. John reached the Night King at the base of the hill. Their blades met, ice against Valyrian steel. Steel sang, sparks flew, and the storm itself seemed to pause. The Night King was fast inhumanly. Fast, but John was driven by something deeper than blood or vengeance. He fought not just for life, but for the truth, for the memory of Robb, for Arya, for Bran, for the father who had finally returned from death not with rage, but with wisdom. And in that final strike, when Longclaw pierced the Night King's chest, it was not just John's blade, but Ned's legacy that found its mark. The Night King shattered into 1,000 shards of ice. And with him, the army of the dead collapsed like puppets cut from their strings. Silence fell. The kind of silence that follows catastrophe. John fell to one knee, exhausted, bloodied, but alive. Cheers rose from the survivors. Ragged, stunned, glorious. Ned, still high in the tower, lowered his head in silent prayer. Not to the seven, not even to the old gods, just a whisper to the memory of Lyanna. He did it. Days passed. The dead were burned, the wounded tended. The wall stood, scarred but unbroken, and word spread like wildfire, not just of the victory, but of Jon Snow reborn, commander of the living, slayer of death itself. And then came Daenerys. She arrived from the south with her dragons and unsullied. Too late to fight the Night King, but early enough to claim her role in what came next. When she met Jon, sparks flew not of war, but of something more human, more fragile. Ed watched from afar. He knew what Jon did not, yet know that she was his aunt, that their blood shared a history written in fire and tragedy. Jon confided in him soon after. "She's not what I expected," Jon said. "She's fierce, but kind. We could rebuild something together." Ned nodded slowly. "She deserves the truth, as do you both." Jon hesitated. "And if the truth breaks everything, then it was never meant to stand." Jon turned away, troubled. And Ned realized then his greatest challenge was not behind him. It was ahead. Telling the realm what had been hidden for a generation. Deciding whether truth was worth the cost, and whether his son could bear the weight of a crown forged in silence. The snows began to melt. For the first time in what felt like years, the land stirred beneath its blanket of white. The threat of the dead was gone, and yet Westeros remained tense. The war for survival had ended, but the war for power had only begun to stir again. Daenerys Targaryen's army had reached Winterfell. Her dragons perched on the broken ramparts. Like ancient gods returned, and the surviving Northmen watched them with awe and unease. Jon welcomed her with guarded respect, but things had changed. Victory had not soothed him. It had only deepened the shadows behind his eyes. He was haunted by the dead, by the battle, by the truth now burning inside him like wildfire waiting for a spark. Ned remained in the crypts of Winterfell, hidden to most. Only a select few knew the truth of his return. He spent his days walking through the halls he once ruled, a ghost among ghosts. The castle was colder now, silent in ways that pierced the bones. The Stark children he had known were gone. In their place stood hardened versions, shaped by war, exile, and grief. He saw Arya first. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stared at him with eyes like flint and said, "You're not dead." "No," he replied quietly. "You let us believe it." "Let me believe it." Her voice cracked, but her posture did not. Ned nodded. "I did, and I will carry that pain until I die." She turned from him. "You already did." He wanted to explain. Everything: the trap, the plan, the pain, but Arya was not a girl anymore. She had lived in the shadows of assassins and worn other people's faces. She understood sacrifice. She just didn't forgive it easily. "Why come back now?" she asked. "Because your brother knows the truth, and the realm is not ready for it." Arya studied him again, this time not as a daughter, but as a judge. "Then we make them ready." It was Sansa who reacted differently. She looked at Ned with a kind of cautious reverence, a flicker of the girl she once was fighting behind the mask of a queen in the making. "You've returned from the dead," she said, "but the North has moved on. I've held it together, piece by piece. People trust me." "I do not wish to rule," Ned assured her. "I only want to help you all survive what comes next." She nodded slowly, her voice lower. "Then you should know Daenerys doesn't trust easily, and she's not coming here to share power." "She believes in destiny," Ned said. "She believes in fire," Sansa replied, "and fire always burns." Jon, meanwhile, grew more distant from Daenerys by the day. He tried to deny it, tried to tell himself that blood didn't matter, that history didn't define love. But it did. And when Daenerys finally asked him what was wrong, he told her. "My name is not Snow," he said. "It's Aegon Targaryen. I am the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna." Her eyes widened, her breath caught, but it wasn't disbelief. That followed. It was fear. "You have a claim," she said, barely above a whisper. "I don't want it. That won't matter to others." And it was true. Whispers spread quickly, especially when Varys ever the Spider confirmed it with ancient records and testimonies from men long buried by secrets. Lords began to write letters. Banners began to stir. People spoke of Jon in hushed tones, not just as a war hero, but as the true heir. Daenerys changed after that. She grew colder, more commanding. Her gaze lingered on Jon too long, her voice sharp when discussing loyalty. She began executing dissenters with fire, and even Tyrion could no longer calm her in secret. She summoned her council. "If he won't bend the knee to me, then he is a threat," she said. Tyrion hesitated. "He has done everything to support you. Everything except kneel." Ned heard of this through Davos, who remained his eyes in the court. And for the first time since returning, Ned Stark felt dread not from the dead, but from the living, from dragons, from crowns. He met Jon beneath the heart tree, the old gods watching. "You cannot remain neutral," Ned said. "You must choose." "I've made my choice. I'll support her. She will not allow that." "Not if she believes you are a threat." Jon looked tired. "Then what do I do? Kill her? Let her kill me?" Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "You tell the truth. To everyone. Let them choose. Let the realm see both of you, and decide not with fire or steel, but with reason." Jon stared up at the heart tree, red leaves drifting, like blood in the wind. "If there's one thing I've learned," he said, "it's that reason rarely wins." The great hall of Winterfell echoed with tense silence. The lords of the north, the Vale, the Riverlands, and even the Reach had come, drawn by the news no raven could contain for long. Jon Snow was not a bastard. He was Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, the last living male heir of House Targaryen. And Ned Stark, who had returned from the grave to confirm it, stood beside him. Daenerys sat at the high table, flanked by Tyrion and Grey Worm, her face frozen like the wall. She had not objected to the gathering, yet she had not welcomed it either. Her dragons waited outside the gates, stirring clouds with every wing beat. Jon stood before them all, the weight of two names pressing down on him. He looked from face to face. Sir Royce, Jon of the Vale, wary and upright. Lady Manderly, stern, but curious. Glover, who had once turned his back on House Stark, and now seemed eager to make amends. Even Samwell Tarly, who had ridden north with proof from the Citadel, stood among them, clutching parchment and history. Then Jon turned to them. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I didn't seek a crown. I never wanted power. I wanted peace. But peace demands truth. And the truth is this. I was born to Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. My name is Aegon. My father annulled his marriage. I was born legitimate, hidden, raised as a Stark to protect me from Robert's wrath." Gasps moved through the hall, whispers like rising wind. Jon continued, "My father Ned Stark kept this secret, not to deceive, but to protect me. I owe him my life, and I owe you all the truth." Then he stepped aside, and all eyes fell on Ned. His face was older, his voice rougher. But when he spoke, the North remembered the man who had ruled them with quiet honor. "I failed many of you," Ned said, "by silence, by absence. But I did it all to keep this boy alive. He is not only my sister's son, he is the hope for a realm torn in two." Daenerys stood. She had heard enough. "You speak of truth," she said, voice like steel. But truth has made no one a king. I crossed the narrow sea to free people, to break chains. I bled for this realm, and I will not see my birthright stolen by a man who wants no throne. John met her gaze. I don't want it, but people may choose differently. They already have, she snapped. I have dragons, armies, victory. And yet, Ned said quietly, you sound afraid. The words cut through the room like a sword. Tyrion winced. Varys, standing in shadow, said nothing. Daenerys' lips trembled. I am not afraid. But Jon saw at the edge in her eyes, the desperate flicker. She wasn't the girl who had walked out of fire. She was a queen surrounded by doubt, grasping for control. And the realm saw it too. The lords began to murmur, louder this time. Some looked to Jon. Some still held loyalty to the Dragon Queen. But the tides had turned, subtly, dangerously. Later that night, in the solar chambers of Winterfell, Tyrion found Ned sitting by the hearth. You've stirred something. The hand said quietly. I stirred nothing, Ned replied. I only spoke truth. Tyrion sipped wine. And truth, Lord Stark, is far more dangerous than lies these days. Ned looked into the flames. What would you have me do? Sit idle while the realm crowns another tyrant? Tyrion hesitated. She's not a tyrant. Not yet, but she's close. You remember what your friend Robert became after he won. This realm doesn't need fire. It needs balance. And Jon? He might be that balance, Tyrion admitted. But only if she doesn't burn him first. Across the castle, Daenerys stood alone in the godswood, snowflakes melting against her skin. Her dragons were restless. Her heart was war. She had come for the throne. But now she saw that Westeros had changed without her. And Jon, honest, loyal Jon, was both her blood and her undoing. She closed her eyes and whispered into the wind. They will choose him. Behind her, Grey Worm approached quietly. Shall the first prepare the men? Daenerys didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, ravens flew in every direction, and Ned knew the winds of war had not died with the Night King. They had only changed their name. Winterfell did not sleep. Tension hung in the stone halls like smoke before battle. The fires were stoked high. The gates watched closely. But the danger was no longer the dead or a foreign army. It was what came from within. Truth had cracked open the foundations of power, and now every whispered word carried the weight of blood and fire. Ned sat beside the weirwood tree in the godswood, his old hands resting on his knees, eyes closed. He remembered the day Lyanna died, the blood, the crying infant in her arms, the promise. Promise me, Ned. The words had haunted every choice he'd made since. And now they had reached their final reckoning. Jon came to him just before dawn. She's planning something, he said without preamble. She's begun moving troops. Quietly. No fanfare. Just orders to prepare for unrest. Ned nodded, unsurprised. She's cornered. And a dragon cornered is worse than one unleashed. I still don't want the throne, Jon said. I meant every word. I know you did. But sometimes what we want doesn't matter. It's what others believe we must be. Jon hesitated. If I step aside, if I kneel again. She won't accept that, Ned said. Not now. Your existence threatens everything she's built. You can't kneel low enough to make her feel safe. The silence between them grew heavy. I'm not a killer, Jon whispered. Ned looked up at his son, his nephew, and saw himself in him. The same burden of choices that could never be clean. You already are, he said gently. You killed. To protect the North, to stop the dead. You made hard choices. This is no different. Jon turned away, fists clenched. Then what? Assassinate her in the night? Poison her wine? No, Ned said firmly. That's not who you are. You face her. Tell her what must be done. If she cannot see reason, then let her fall by her own fire. Later that day, John entered the great hall with purpose. The lords had gathered again, uncertain and restless. Daenerys stood at the high table, regal in silver and red, her eyes hollow and sharp. Grey Worm flanked her. Tyrion sat nearby, watching with silent dread. John walked to the center and turned to face them all. "I cannot be your king," he said. "I will not take a throne built on blood. But I also cannot let the realm be ruled by fear. This kingdom deserves peace. And to have that, we must end the war inside our walls." Daenerys rose slowly. "You speak of peace, yet you divide the realm. You speak of unity, yet you let them crown you with whispers." "I never asked for that crown," John said. "But I won't let it become an excuse for tyranny." Daenerys stepped down the dais, face tight. "So what do you suggest, Aegon? That I bend the knee to you? That I give up everything I've fought for, because the realm loves you more?" "No," he said. "I suggest we both step away." The room went still. Let the lords choose a new leader. Not based on fire or name, based on what is best for the realm. Her expression cracked, ever so slightly. "You're asking me to give up the world." "I'm asking you to save it." But she saw what he could not say, that the lords would never choose her now, that her dream of a better world had been stolen from her the moment John's truth came. To light, she stepped back, then looked to Grey Worm. "No," she said, "I will not let them take this from me." Grey Worm drew his blade. Everything moved at once. Arya appeared from the shadows, blade in hand. The Unsullied rushed forward. Ghosts snarled. Northern guards braced for chaos. And John stepped forward, faster than anyone expected, and caught Daenerys as she turned, his arms around her. Not as a lover, as a warning. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And then he drove the dagger into her heart. Her eyes widened, stunned, betrayed, and utterly broken. She died in his arms. The hall exploded into shouts. But Tyrion raised his voice. "Stop. Let this end here." And Ned, emerging from the crowd, added only one sentence. "No more kings. No more queens. Let Westeros choose its own fate." In the weeks that followed, Daenerys was laid to rest beyond the wall, where no throne could claim her. The dragons vanished into the east. And for the first time in generations, the lords of Westeros met not to follow a crown, but to shape a council. Jon refused the role of king. He returned to the Night's Watch, what remained of it choosing exile as atonement. Sansa became warden of the North. Arya sailed west, where maps faded. And Ned Stark, the man who had died and returned, who had broken his code to keep a promise, lived out his last days in the quiet of the Godswood, his name slowly fading into legend, not as a lord, as a hero, but as a man who dared to tell the truth in a world built on lies.